Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, both in person and on Zoom. My name is Derek Pratt. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programming here at the Erie Canal Museum. Thank you again for joining us today. The impact of the Erie Canal has been immense, socially, economically, politically, and artistically. To this day, the canal still operates under the direction of the New York State Canal Corporation. I know there are several employees, both in person and on Zoom, so welcome. With hundreds of workers employed in maintaining this over 100-year-old system. Too often, these folks and the important work they do is overlooked. This year, in a joint partnership between the Erie Canal Museum and the Canal Corporation, we are pleased to be shining a light on this critical topic through art, with our very first Artist in Residence program. It's our fifth lunchtime lecture of 2023, with this year's theme being art. Our next lunchtime lecture is on June 22nd and will be both virtual and in person. With us will be historian Patrick Ryan discussing William Wells Brown, who escaped slavery and risked his life to help others find freedom. In his spare time, he taught himself to read and write, lectured on abolition, and was the first African American to publish a novel and later play. Subject next talk. This year, you can also sign up for an annual lunchtime lecture pass, where you'll be automatically registered for all lectures and receive a recording of each talk afterwards. You can, however, choose to attend the lectures in person or virtually. Don't miss another lunchtime lecture and eliminate the hassle of signing up monthly with this new feature. Also, if you sign up now for an annual pass, you will get sent to you a backlog of all of the previous talks, recordings as well. Anyway, in addition to all that, lunchtime lecture stuff, today our Beers, Bikes, and Barges series kicks off at 6 p.m. in Buffalo, but we'll be hosting rides throughout New York all through the summer. Coming up on June 8th, we'll be in Schenectady, and on June 22nd, we're happy to be partnering with the H. Lee White Maritime Museum in Oswego to run a tour there. Come explore history by bike with us on this fun and informative series, then enjoy a drink, included in the price of your ticket at a local brewery bar. Finally, if you're interested in helping out here at the museum, we're always looking for new volunteers. One way you can find out about a few exciting opportunities this summer is on June 1st. We will have an informational meeting on how to be a trail or garden ambassador at 6 p.m. All right, so that's all my commercials. Now on to today's event. Matthew López-Jensen teaches environmental art and activism at Fordham University and Parsons School of Design. He's a Guggenheim Fellow in photography, and his work is in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, National Gallery, Brooklyn Museum, and many others. He is the first artist in residence with the Erie Canal, and today we'll introduce a selection of his recent environmental and socially engaged art projects, and also discuss his work in progress, which you can all be part of as well, the work and the water. Matt will explain his interdisciplinary approach to art making, his past work with historic waterways, and how his projects celebrate the relationship with people and place. He's also created the Instagram page at all 524 miles to capture some of this process, research, project development. So if you'd like to keep following along with Matt's project after today, check that Instagram page out. Without further ado, for you. Try it again. Sure.
Is there a way to get rid of this, Terry?
What? That? No,
top bar.
It's great. Try as best as I can. Hide it.
Got it.
Right. Thank you, everyone on Zoom. And so the Matt López-Jensen, and I don't have a script, so this is going to be kind of an ambling, meandering journey. It's not going to be too structured, and I only have 102 slides, so But also everyone on Zoom and everyone in the audience has a little card. Well, if you're on the Zoom, you don't have the card, you're going to use the chat function. And if you have the card, it's just, I would love for you to think throughout the course of this next few minutes, if you could share a memory that you have from the canal. So not a particular lock, but if you've ever done anything along the canal, what's the first thing that pops in your head? Maybe you could write the location name, and it can be a park, a preserve, side of the road, a curbside. Maybe you get scared by a snake somewhere when you're walking your dog. But what memory pops in your mind? So the title of that little card, you write location. Location will let me find it later. And then you don't have to tell me the history of the place or anything. Just tell me that memory or that story. And so if you are on Zoom, you can do that. And at some point before you leave the Zoom room, just maybe you could send that in the chat. You can just put the location of that experience and share that memory. And I'll capture all those and keep them. And if you've never been to the Erie Canal because you're coming from somewhere else, then don't worry about it. You don't have any homework. And that little prompt, that little contribution sort of connects with the larger idea of what I'm working on now with the canal. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to go into the slides. And so this opening picture, we'll come back to it, but it's just this. I like to look down at the swirls of pollen and things that get collected in the water. And this is just the perfect combination. So I thought I would start with like, what is a residency? Because it doesn't make much sense if you don't know what an artist residency is. Most historical museums don't have them, and they're maybe the more of an art world thing, and they are. But basically, it is this is just going to be 2 minutes of what is an artist residency, and it can be many things. Sometimes it's a cabin in the woods. This was a McDowell residency I did. It was me in that cabin by myself, but it was the whole system of 24 artists in that landscape. We would meet in the evening, and we would go back to our cabins and work. Sometimes it's an affiliation with an agency. This was a residency I did with the Urban Field Station in New York City, which is a partnership with the Forest Service. And so that was a year-long connection, kind of like with canals. They didn't give me a place to stay. I didn't sleep in their bunks. We just worked with pairing scientists with myself and other artists. And so a big project came out of that. Sometimes it's only 8 days long and I'm by myself. This was a little residency at an arboretum in Stone Ridge in the Catskills. That was fun. So they're all over the world and almost every type of setting. Sometimes there's dozens of artists at once. Sometimes you're all alone. Sometimes you have housing. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a support team. Sometimes you have dinners prepared for you. Sometimes there's funding. Sometimes there's resulting exhibitions. Often nothing at all is expected or asked of you. Usually they are free. There are some that you pay for. Sometimes it feels like summer camp. Sometimes it feels like work, but it's always incredibly generative. So whatever amount of time you spend, whether it's 8 days or a year or 2 years, just you end up with a ton of work. And that's why artists go and do them. And one of the most famous ones that I'm aware of that I learned early on was light work, and it happened to be here in Syracuse. And so it's very hard to get. I haven't gotten it yet, but one day we're gonna get there. I have a lot of friends who've done it and enjoyed it. And so this artist in the residency is with Reimagining Canals and the Erie Canal Museum. It's a partnership between the two. And it's basically a year of developing a project. And so I'm not based anywhere along the canal. Even if I was, that wouldn't really help me much because it's 524 miles. And so it's that kind of situation. But generally when I do a project, it combines the idea of walking, social practice, environmental science, mapping, photography, activism, and research. And so when someone says, oh, you're an artist, what does that mean? You have to be prepared for a really long answer because it's a lot of things. Because I'm also an educator. This is a class I developed for at Fordham University. And so it's called Art in Action on the Bronx River. And it's a collaboration with a nonprofit that has been reviving the river over the past 40 years, the Bronx River Alliance. And so the class is anchored in, and this picture is really the inspiring image. This is a picture from the 70s of activism's local activists, local people who live in the neighborhood, and this like cool piece of machinery that was being used to pull abandoned cars out of the river and refrigerators out of the river. So it was that citizen activity that really revived the river. And with my students, I I teach about the history of environmental art, but also the history of that activism, the landscape along it, and we actually get to go into the river. And so, believe it or not, that's the Bronx. Those are my students who are incredibly scared right now, even though the water's only a few inches deep. But a lot of them, the campus is nearby. They've never actually seen the river. They've never touched the river. And so the class has a chance for them to connect with the landscape. And also, we're also doing engagement projects. So we're doing each semester a different making thing that somehow is a contribution to the community. And so those change every semester. And in a similar vein, I teach a class at Parsons called Image, Action, and the Environment, with the keyword being action again. So I've got my students who are art students learning about the history of documentation and that documentation's relationship to civic activity and art making. And so last year we photographed the first ever City of Forest Day, which was all around New York City. And so my students both did the weeding, but also photographed the process of maintenance. And so we have 700,000 street trees in all of these huge parks, and a lot of that is kept up by community activism. And so my class dovetailed with a lot of that activity. So my students were both taking pictures like this, but they were also weeding and planting. And for art students to get to touch dirt is kind of a novelty. And so that's a little bit about my educational side of me. I do that kind of in the spring and fall semesters. So while I'm doing this residency, I'm also juggling classes, teaching in the spring and teaching in the fall even more. So the summer is going to be a really busy time here. So this talk is a little bit about past work, and then we'll slowly navigate into where I'm thinking and what I'm thinking about when I'm doing canals. I talk fast though, I realize that. Sorry, I have to slow down. And sometimes I'll just pass out. I'll just like, boom, I'm gone. So tree love, street trees in New York City. I just had 3 or 4 little projects, and then they're not little projects. I tend to not work in small confined spaces. I tend to just walk everywhere. And so for this project, it's came out of my relationship with the Urban Field Station and the Forest Service. And so I'm visiting with those scientists who are studying the relationship between public space and trees, and public space and gardening, and people and the community. And what I was interested in is street trees. And so this is a good example here of a really beautiful elm tree cutting right down through a really historic district in Manhattan. But what I was photographing really was this beautiful moss on the trunk. And so what my photographs do in this series is look at the relationship between the trees in the city, but also between care and the trees. And so what I get really excited the most to photograph are notions like on the right and in the center there, these little funny things that somebody did to help that tree. So on the right, on the left, there's a little plum tree that was planted in an old tree pit, but it's about to fall over, so somebody cut a piece of wood to the exact size and propped it in there to keep it up. In the middle, somebody is trying to keep the dogs from peeing right on that bark of that tree, and so they must replace this cardboard box every time it rains. But they go out and they tape it down there with duct tape, and so there are just thousands and thousands of things like this that happen all throughout New York City that are people connecting with a tree, and so therefore connecting with nature. And sometimes those little tiny tree pits or beds are the only kind of connection that somebody might have to the green environment. And so this is a sort of really large, expensive project where I tried to walk through every neighborhood in the city, looking for exemplary trees, amazing trees, old trees, trees that are broken, trees that are regrowing themselves, and every different conversation happening between all of them. So I do exhibit work in galleries and in museums and in non-conventional spaces. This is a little tiny 2-car garage space in Brooklyn. This was a show I did in Japan where I had to get in a helicopter and fly along the Fuji River and photograph the sun reflecting from the river, and then also collect objects from the river. So there was like 7 rooms of photographs and objects. This is the New Jersey Visual Arts Center of New Jersey, where I did a really kind of a 1.5 year adventuring and photographing and researching 4 landscapes in northern New Jersey that are all connected and somehow connected through geology and hydrology through the Passaic River and through the glacial action. And when I'm walking, I'm generally looking for objects and collecting them, taking them home. And in this case, we have another like swirl of pollen and rocks and objects found from the Passaic River, with the sun looking right back at us. This was an installation in Wilmington, Delaware, where I worked with a group of volunteers. I was out in the landscape every day, and they had their homework, which was to create these boxes filled with studies on their local landscape. So the park nearest their house, they had to go and do several projects on that. And then their work was presented alongside mine. We had a big conversation at this table thing at the end of the show. That's one of the largest kind of glacial erratics in Wilmington that nobody knows about because it's kind of hiding in the woods. So I photographed it and replicated it to scale in the gallery. And then walking is a big part of my process, and I try to share that whenever I can, or whenever the opportunity is presented to me, where I create a walk. It's not a tour. Generally, sometimes the people on the walk know more than I do, and so we share that information on the way. We do different tasks. Each one is designed for that particular landscape, usually coming from a long-term research project in that place. So Storm King and parks in New York City, Pennsylvania, Flatbush Avenue. And then if you're here in person, there's some map examples over there that have come from some of those projects. Okay, so I wanted to include one really long, complicated project, the most complicated thing I've ever done, but it's still in works and we're just exhibiting it now. But it's a really good example of social practice, of landscape, community, and of all these different scientific things coming together around infrastructure, believe it or not. It looks like embroidery now, but you'll understand it's actually a project about stormwater management. And so there's a little stream in the Northwest Bronx called Tibbetts Brook. Nobody in the Northwest Bronx really knows about it because the city has taken it and shoved it into the sewer, and now it causes all sorts of problems. And so if you live in the Bronx, you don't really know about this little stream. If you live in Westchester, you play along the stream in the parks. And so it's this little stream that runs into the lake in Vancouver. And so the first thing I did was walk everything I could of it, climb fences, research the history, create this digital map that allowed people to walk through. And so I know we're not from here, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Not really. So there's a line here, and that's the historic water course here in the Bronx. That's what it looks like now. That's what it looks like if you climb a fence in a golf course. It's really pretty. But only for a minute, because that's how it disappears. That's the only really part of the Tibbetts Brook we see as New Yorkers. And it goes into the sewer system. And if you know anything about climate change or giant rain events that have been happening, it tends to flood. Now we have these crazy floods. We had 2 in 1 year. This is just me on my way to get groceries, taking this picture with the news there and people like, what is happening? And that's what's happening. It's just, that's the former course of the stream. It wants to flow, but it can't because it's crammed under the sewers, and everybody's basements in the neighborhood floods. Some people make the best of it. One of the solutions would be green roofs. If all of the big box stores in the former marshland had green roofs like this, those little plants in that substrate would absorb the water and keep it in the landscape until it evaporates, instead of forcing it into the sewer system and flooding the neighborhood. But this was everything we're seeing now was former marshland. So the marshland was sort of just taken by the city, filled in and sold off for real estate. And what I did was I turned that landscape into a map. And so this is where it gets really complicated. So all of that research led into this. And this is a map of all the kind of flat roofs in this area that, wouldn't it be great if they had green roofs? It would solve so many infrastructure problems. So I took that map, divided it into 120 little squares, had each square machine embroidered. And so this is a little tile that, if you can't really tell, the gray lines are rooftops, the yellow lines is where the subway runs, the blue line is where the stream will run when it's daylighted and brought above ground. I developed stitches based on 7 or 15 plants that would grow really well on a rooftop in this zone. So that's prickly pear, that's goldenrod. And then I started teaching about embroidery. I had to teach myself how to do some of this embroidery. Then I started teaching it to students, and we had Zoom calls with volunteers. This is also done in the middle of the pandemic. So how do you do public art with people in the middle of the pandemic? Zoom was really helpful. We created a website that featured the history of the landscape, that taught people you could basically learn how to do these stitches. The whole project was designed thinking that nobody would know how to do embroidery. So by the end of it, you would learn about embroidery, learn about plants, learn about infrastructure and green roofs and stormwater management. whether you like it or not. And so what was nice is that we had funding, so everybody who participated got a kit in the mail, and they were really, really complicated with all of the threads and all of the supplies you need, and all of the threads kind of mapped out to the different colors you need for the different plants. And this is a good example of one of the participant squares. So in this case, Dana did a really beautiful combination of native plants on these roofs, but she planted street trees everywhere, took over the roads, and just had some fun with it. And so it's a little nonsensical. It's not actually possible to do this in all these cases, but it's beautiful. That's one of 120. We put them all together. We had them all shipped back to us, and then it was put together as a single tapestry. So this is a 15-foot hand-embroidered tapestry by over 100 volunteers from throughout the Bronx and the world, really. And it's on exhibit at, in this case, in this historic house museum in the Bronx called the Van Cortlandt House Museum, oldest building in New York, in the Bronx, also surrounded by the floodplain that this place is. This is about. And so you're looking at a map about the place you're standing. And so that's really helpful for people to understand how they are impacted, and how it's not about a foreign place, or a place that they don't have a connection to, but they can look at this and go, oh, right, that's the Staples. And yeah, that is a huge roof. And wouldn't it be nice if there was a garden there? And it was just a lot of fun. It was, you know, the darker days of the pandemic, and Imam Zoo, and working with Ana de la Cueva, an artist based in Guadalajara, Mexico. And so the two of us are collaborating on a lot of those stitches, and the whole thing came together. It was exhibited in Mexico, and then was brought back up to the Bronx, and now it's on view again for its third iteration. So now it's this sort of traveling artwork that can should go. Of course, people had a little fun, and that was the best part, is all the surprises that came from this. So it was really one of the coolest participatory projects I've ever had the opportunity to be a part of. But if you can only imagine how hard it was to make. And from an administration standpoint, I like to say that it's really the art of an admin. Like, if you know, you must know Excel to make this artwork happen. So now that's just a little bit, but I've been doing these different projects for years. And if you can. So the Erie Canal residency research phase. So artists don't arrive knowing what they're going to do. They have to think about it. And especially if you're working in a contemporary context where you might want to, you need to know the history of a place. You need to know the problems of a place, the environment, the future, and think about it all. And so luckily the Erie Canal residency program was designed with a good 3 months of just like, we don't want you to do anything but think and research and read. And so that's what I did for the winter months. I did some travels and some trips. And those have begun to aggregate on adult 5 to 4 miles. So that's a Herkimer Diamond. This is a winter trip to a movable dam. And these really cool cement barges that were sunk to kind of just create like a erosion barrier. And this is Watkins Glen, and this is a fish ladder, and the Cayuga, edge of Cayuga Lake, a really amazing mural. And so if you click on one of those, you get to see all the pictures. But one of the coolest things that started was one of my first trips is this little picture that we'll get back to of a really beautiful cottonwood tree. And so from that research and that work, and I'm trying to begin to understand how much work it takes to get the system to function, I came up with this title and this idea called The Work in the Water. This is Photoshop. This is not actually there. Yeah, I think exactly. It looks impressive, right? I love these blue signs in Photoshop. So I created this and then installed it on this breaker here. That's Seneca Lake. So the work in the water, and this is a great symbolic image where you're looking through the walkways and the hand railings, that sort of blue and yellow signature colors of the canal system, but you're also looking down at the water. And so this is started, and so there's so many people who work to keep the canal working and moving and functioning, and I don't have the opportunity to meet them all. They are spread out over 524 miles. So one of the things I've always loved is mail art, M-A-I-L, art, mail art that uses the Postal Service as part of its open process. And so there's a history of it, goes back to the 60s and 70s, goes back to the Fluxus movement, and artists would send things to themselves, artists would then ask for participation. And so I had that in mind. I teach about it. I love to do it with my students. And so I had it in mind when I came up with this idea to begin the process of collecting notions from those who work in the field or in the landscape. And so what you're seeing here is a stack of postcards, a stack of blank cards, all these envelopes, and me working on cards that look similar to what's in there, where there's a question, an optional local location. You can share the location or not. You can share your name or not. But really, mostly, I want you to answer a question of what's, say, for instance, what's one of the more challenging things you do off season. Simple as that. Like, what's one of the harder days you have? And so I sent a personal letter to everybody inside this envelope and a return addressed mailing, so that if you wanted to participate and you work in the field and you have 5 minutes to spare, you can fill out this form and you'll share a notion with me. And so this is the first time a lot of Canal employees have actually interacted with the visiting artists. I think I forgot to say thank you to everybody. Like, thank you for having me. Yeah. First moment, thank you to the museum, thank you to Canal. Thank you for letting me be the first artist to incorporate the Canal into their thinking. I'm not going to be the last. I imagine that there'll be more. And each artist will bring a new perspective, and really exciting things will come from this program over the years. I'm sorry, I forgot to start off with that. But so this is the first time Canal employees have had to interact with a visiting artist or hear that phrase. And so it's really hard for me to predict the outcome. The contributed text will eventually define the finished series of works. They will also remain in the archive here at the Erie Canal Museum. The idea is to invite viewers, us and those who enjoy recreation along the canal, to recognize the off-season, non-nav season work while trying to view a scenic on-season, nav season landscape. So exactly how these texts and other records of work will exist as final works remains to be seen. But so a few have started to come back to me. So everybody a month ago or so got this kit in their mailbox, or they delivered it to their lock. And some folks have started to contribute participate. And so they used the envelope provided and they sent their cards back. And each of them were sort of embellished so that the text that they contribute really almost feels like a ready-made artwork. And so these are a few examples. In the fall, we removed heavy electrical equipment from cabinets. We moved it to our on-site workshop where we disassemble, inspect, and refinish it before reassembly, then reinstalled in cabinets before navigation. And this one is wonderfully blunt. It's just degreasing gears. And that's exactly what I was hoping for. It's just like simple, blunt answers or complicated, long answers. And I didn't really even want to have to understand them all yet, because that's the idea, is that so much of what happens, we don't understand because we don't do the work. And so the reason we do tree maintenance is not just for looks. It prevents dam failures and blockages important for water level control. Opening valves to allow the gates to open. H2O is extremely strong. The gates will waver when the H2O has gotten into equilibrium. Very cool. Spectators are very impressed. So there's more, and there's only 5 participants who we're looking at. I've got 20 more here that I haven't even opened the envelope. So later today, we might open them and see what they say. So this is just an example of an image I took. Really perfect example of a beautiful scene. This is the same scene with text on top of it, the text coming from one of the participants, opening valves to allow the gates to open. So you can see now this is just a really very illustrative example. It's blunt. It's just text on an image. Sometimes it's very vivid. Sometimes you can barely see it. Each one of the ways the fonts and the text are organized forces you to really either work really hard to read the language or work really hard to see the landscape. And so the works that I'm going to create are not going to be just like this. I'll have the whole fall to figure out how these different pieces of text incorporate with different images, and which images and why. How hard do I want to make it to see the images, and how hard do I want it make you work to read the language? But either way, those two things will be coming together, the off-season text and the on-season landscapes. Because a lot of what I do is based in the action of looking at landscape. So the final works might also find non-text ways to bring in the unseen labor and maintenance of the canal system. So it might not be all text. I'll be, much of the summer will be devoted to taking photographs, visiting sites, trying to collect more texts, photographing the workshops, and building this really big archive that I have to work from. And then much of the fall will be spent bringing these elements together into final works of art. So there will also be other projects. So I never really, when I do a project, I kind of tend to spill out everywhere. I don't say, no, you can't take that picture. You can't think about that thing. So I always end up with 10 other projects that I want to do, that I might do in 5 years. And so while I'm out, I've been out quite a bit, and I'll be out for a lot more this summer. I'm just visiting every lock. That's my hope. Every lock in the system, and as many of the parks in between, as many of the towns in between. I'm looking at the system as an ecological corridor, looking at access and barriers to access, and meaning human access, like what is keeping somebody from using the space. Looking at specific sites in need of reimagining. The whole program is called Reimagine the Canal, so that word was just stuck in my head. And so whenever I go to a site, I'm like, well, wouldn't it be great if? And I start to think about, what could be better in this location. And then I'm speculating on the system and its connections to climate change and population shifts. So the work won't really end this year or even next year. I'll probably be working with these ideas and the final images for the rest of my life. That's generally how it goes with environmental work. We start thinking in tree years. I'm kind of obsessed with trees, and you'll see that in a minute, but I do think more now in tree years. And that's helpful, so I don't need immediate, none of my projects really had immediate results. Sometimes they're long-term. So we're gonna look at a few slides based on my some of my trips out that are provocations, maybe become future projects. So this is a really beautiful example of a very standard composition, but a really cool jagged tooth dam that I did not expect to find. I saw just the water from the satellite. This is in Fort Miller on the Champlain Valley. Really, really cool shot, but the best views shouldn't be off limits. So I had to follow community footpaths in order to get here, because most of the signage, there's no actual trail to this location. I just had to kind of like look, where is everybody walking, and then just follow the footsteps of wherever's walking. And it always leads to some nice place to fish or a good, interesting discovery. And in this case, this is a really cool old abandoned canals or waterway system. It has hiding inside like the yellow and the blue railings, but it would just be the most amazing platform for people to stand and look at the river. But nobody going to this particular park has access to the river at all. It's just a line of trees and overgrowth. This was actually kind of tragic. And I'm thinking about this all the time, especially when I'm driving around and having to drive around. I wish I didn't have to use a car. But wouldn't it be nice if there were more under road crossings throughout the corridor, so that all of the animals that live in amazing landscapes that we're trying to promote and celebrate don't die. And so if there were tunnels, just simple tunnels or archway tunnels large enough for this little guy. What's sad about this one, and really what kicked it off, was that I drove down this way and he wasn't there. I pulled in, I saw a really huge woodchuck by the river, and I was like, oh my God, and very excited to see it. And then I drove back this way and he was there. Not the same woodchuck, smaller, but I was really depressed that in the 10 minutes that I drove down and back, or in the half an hour I was gone, this guy was killed. So I took out my camera and I photographed it, and it really made me think. And in this one day, I saw a dead otter, a dead beaver, a dead turkey, a dead fox, dead possums, like a dead porcupine, like all over the place. And so that kind of it hurts me every time I see them. So when I can, I'll move them, especially if I'm photographing them. The least I can do is get them out of the road. And so it made me think that, one thing would be great is, as we move into a world of self-driving cars, if those cars have the ability to detect the heartbeats of animals that are this size and stop and not kill them. These are also really dangerous. People swerve to not get hit, not kill the animals. They swerve to not run over the roadkill. And in that process, they get an accident themselves. So there's a lot of design implications by this one image that I'll be kind of photographing more and more. I started thinking about the idea, on a happier note, wildflowers along the Erie Canal. There are some, they're hiding if they don't get mowed down. What if there was a sort of wildlife corridor that was overlaying the entire system, so that if you go to visit a site by boat, you can also be guaranteed to see a spray of wildflowers. And then it helps because they're already a bird and insect kind of migratory pattern around any river, it allows that course to be kind of filled out. I also think about the landscapes themselves as whether they're welcoming or not. Is the place inviting to visitors, to people new to the neighborhood? this was a situation in which I was walking out here with my camera. How does surveillance, fencing, signage create ambiguity and unease for visitors? I think about this everywhere, not just in the Erie Canal, in New York City parks too. It's exciting to be near the canal infrastructure. It gets really cool to see these metal things, these machinery. But sometimes it feels illegal. Sometimes I feel like I'm breaking the law myself. And in this case, I was standing here and this thing said, "Stop, you are breaking the law. You're on trespassing." It said something weird in a RoboCop voice. And so, but then I was next to this couple who were enjoying themselves and they're like, "What was that?" I don't know. I guess I'll see you in court. And it's funny, but at the same time, there's certain people who might pack up and leave if they heard that, or if they even saw this thing. Like the fact that I got near it was a surprise. I was like, I've got the hat on, I can walk over here. No one's gonna yell at me, and if they do, I'll just tell them who I am. But not everyone has that luxury, and a lot of people wouldn't get close to this thing, even though they want to see the boat that's parked here, and they want to go out in that canal, which is open with no signs. So that's one thing I think about a lot. And even yesterday, I saw a sign that said it was just bad sign. It just said private property or no trespassing, but yet it was the entranceway to a trail that everybody was taking. And so like, if you're actually looking at the signage in the landscape, sometimes those things can be barriers. So I think about that just sort of practically and always. And then I'm always looking at trees. And so has anybody here in the audience ever driven to Albany? Have you ever driven to Albany in winter? And they're like, why is there a wasteland along the highway? What is happening? And so I've had that experience a few times, and now the wasteland doesn't look so wasted. But basically, I'm pretty sure that wherever there was a historical canal, there's now cottonwood trees growing. And wherever there's cottonwood trees growing, there's lack of stewardship. And in this case, there's beautiful cottonwood trees that are now being taken over by bittersweet vines. So it means that there's no human action, no human access to steward those lands. And so this is just from Google Street View, because I can't pull over and take a picture of these places. This is where I saw the dead otter, because here they just it's just highway and the river's right there, and then there's trees, and then there's a nice invitation for animals to come on up and get squashed. And so if this was just a solid barrier, the animals wouldn't come up and die. But then if there was access to this landscape, people could take care of it. And what I think is interesting is, and it's a good spot to talk about, like wherever there's old canal, and new canal, there's always cottonwood trees. And so they're one of my favorite things to look at in a landscape, the way they sound, the way they look, the way they grow, the way that they try to heal the landscape, because they're usually the first ones to arrive at a place that's been disturbed. So these are probably about 50 years old, and they, I'll get back to cottonwoods. But this is another little local landscape that I love to find. Just things that are unmapped, unplanned. This was at the end of a trail, at the end of a footpath near the river, near the Hudson River, along the Champlain Valley canals. And it was a little place where you could talk to your relatives who have passed on. And so it was just this really beautiful moment. And I love finding like these things that are just unmappable, unknowable, and they, maybe even unshareable. You just enjoy them. And this is an example, I wish that stuff wasn't in the way, but of a community right along the canal, and it's from Waterford. And it really was one of the earliest pictures I took. And this is a good example of a photograph that is just a picture, and it will probably be printed as a photograph and shown as a photograph. Because for me, it's doing so many things at once. It's showing the canal, the embankment, the fences, the houses, the backs of the houses, the historical layers of the houses, and then there's trees. And so now we're just gonna look at some fun pictures that have come from the process so far. This is a picture. I'm obsessed with the Cohoes Falls, or the Mohawk Falls in Cohoes. Anyone here in the audience seen it? Yeah, anyone here admit to not knowing it existed? Okay, that's more than, I didn't either. And I live just in New York City, and I love waterfalls. And this thing is amazing. And I'm showing this one photograph because it's such a good symbol of how sometimes we just don't even realize what we have when we have it. And this is a picture from the park of the waterfall. The park's about the size of this room, and it's not really inviting. You have to know where to get to it, how to get to it. There's no other way to see this waterfall, and it's one of the largest waterfalls I've ever seen after Niagara Falls. Actually, it's the second largest waterfall I've ever seen after Niagara. And it's if you follow the river just a little bit, you're going to be in the Hudson River. So New York City is just down the way. There's no view shed. There's no place to walk down and visit it. This place would be Instagram famous if they just let it. And it would be such a beautiful. There are paths. It would be great to have paths and overlooks. But anyways, this is the sort of industrial infrastructure that is really placed in front of it and given priority. And yeah, I can talk more about that. But this happens a lot. Like the vantage point is priorities given to the hydro dam or the electrical conduits. And this is sort of a bad example of it. But what's so great about so much of the canal system is that there's infrastructure that looks similar to this, but you can walk out on that plank and you can look closely at things, and there's signage to unpack what's happening. Whereas in some cases, it's just sort of broken and powered off, and it's sort of cutting the community, which is behind me right now, from enjoying this natural wonder. Just a really great old set of bridge abutments, railroad bridge running into an island off the Champlain Valley. This is a picture that I really love, and it's not so great on the screens, but just as an object, like the light is beautiful. It really shows the nuances of the metal work. Almost feels like a ready-made, like a Donald Judd minimalist sculpture, but no, those are actually two giant doors that hold back the water. And so I'm photographing the canal as an object as well, like all the different bits and pieces, the giant machinery, the walls, the way things age. There's a kind of a beauty to all of that too that I'm looking at whenever I go to a different site. So the archive is sort of slowly building up of like really cool compositions that are just purely infrastructure. And that a picture like this might end up merging with a landscape in some way later on this year. This is the picture we looked at earlier where I included the sort of yellow hand railings and this little bit of spurt of water to sort of showcase that I can actually stand on this thing. And I didn't even need permission. I was able to walk across this gangplank. And that's, for me, is the coolest invitation to allow the public to do things like this and get these vantage points. This is not the Erie Canal, but it is just a really cool picture that I took while headed up to Albany on Earth Day this year. I was visiting some different, there was a stewardship activity in the old Erie Canal basin and the park there. And on my way to it, I came across this parking garage entrance with a white pine tree growing out of the middle of it. It's just the coolest on Earth Day of all things. So it was for me like a really great moment to pull over and photograph this relationship between nature and infrastructure. But it was actually designed to be this way. You can actually walk into the middle of the spiral. There's some big pieces of bedrock in there on purpose. It's a strange public space, but it is public space. And I just love white pine trees. They're one of my favorites. So this project is inevitable. I didn't expect it to happen, but this picture, this tree graced, I met this tree on the very first trip. It was a cold February day, but we had a rainbow. I don't know if anybody remembers the rainbow in February that happened this year, but that was kind of crazy and weird because we don't usually get rainstorms in February, we get snow. But this huge cottonwood was growing and the rainbow was behind it. And so I photographed it. I had seen a few big cottonwoods down in Waterford. And I was like, I have a feeling there are going to be cottonwoods everywhere and I'm going to be photographing them. And sure enough, these are sycamores, but there are cottonwood. This is another cottonwood. So I'm just photographing the great trees of the canal. I'm calling them great. And every lock seems to have like one magic tree that just draws my attention and probably draws the attention of others. Some of the trees, like most of the cottonwoods, were not planted on purpose. They somehow, through some magic force, forced people to leave them be. So there was a time when this tree was small and nobody cut it down. Why? I don't know. And then it got bigger and bigger, and now it's just amazing. Of course, sometimes that's problematic if you are running a canal, but sometimes it's problematic also because of beavers. They do love to eat the cottonwoods, and I love to photograph what they do. This is a really beautiful cottonwood grove. It's hard to see them on the screen, but they're just like, when you walk into them, you kind of feel the energy shift, and they are just create the most beautiful light and sound, and then they make it snow in June. This is just a photograph of an ash tree because while I'm walking around in landscapes, I'm super sensitive to the trees that are dealing with blights and the trees that we're losing. So just on my drive around the landscapes the past weekend, we've all been watching our ash trees die from the beetle invasions, the emerald ash borer. We've been watching spruce blight. The beech trees have a blight. The white pines can be sickly. The woolly adelgid is eating up all the hemlock trees. And yeah, so many trees are dealing with stresses from the environment, and ash trees are about to almost be extinct. We'll just be dealing with small ones. And so whenever I see them still alive in the landscape, I get super excited. This is a really beautiful cottonwood tree that is growing this amazing site called the Five Combines, which was a feeder canal outside of Fort Edward. And you can't really see the canal. I photographed it. I over photographed it. It's over here. It's just this historic little 5 little waterfalls. It was 5 small locks. But this amazing cottonwood tree is sort of presiding over what is actually a toxic landscape. This is a Superfund site behind it. And so those rolling hills are old landfill. And so it's a cleanup site, and there's signage, there's, not electrified fence, but lots of do not enter signs. And I'm sort of in this public space of it. And this is the last slide I think I have, which is good because we're out of time. This is my favorite picture so far, and it's over at the Flight of 5. And it's a cottonwood, and it's growing in this beautiful combination of, you can see the low water infrastructure behind it, the signature canal stuff above it, and then it's in this sort of well. It's also marked with ribbons, so I'm curious what pink ribbon on a cottonwood means. And it's about to leaf out, and it's really beautiful. And that's that. That's all I have for talking. And we only have 10 minutes left, so hopefully there are some questions. I'm glad when you're rambling. Yeah. So we got 10 minutes, and if you have a question in Zoom, please chat, and Derek, you'll read it out.
Yes.
And if you have a question in real life, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Oh.
You talked so much about and I have a good one around here. But specifically around now, is it because they like take advantage of like level landscapes, or like why exactly are they?
Yeah, their first favorite is destruction sites. And so all of the landscapes around the canals didn't have trees. They're all like level, and everything that feels like nature actually is a constructed landscape. And so they were the first to arrive, and they love water. So you put the two together, constructed landscape next to water, and they're the happiest trees around. And so, yeah, you'll see them even in like, if somebody stops work on a construction site in an urban setting, like in the middle of Syracuse or downtown Manhattan, if they let it sit for a year, you'll have cottonwood trees growing out of its foundation. It's one of my favorite things. And so, yeah, they are the first there, and they're also like really, important folklore. There are certain things you can do with wood, that you can make medicines out of the buds, and they're just amazing trees. Yeah. But yeah, they're everywhere, and now they're older and they're aging. So we have they're not necessarily the longest lived tree because they are almost designed to grow and die and enrich the soil. So they're there sort of to produce better soils. So they will grow over the course of 1,000 years. You'll have 100 or 10 generations of trees grow and die, and then the next generation will take advantage of that better soil. Yeah.
Yeah. When people ask questions, could you just
Yes.
repeat it?
I will do that. Yes. So that was a question about cottonwood trees.
I want to thank you so much. I was thinking about so many things, but I was kind of wanting to build off of that. It's like with this project, we are getting input from people working on the canal, but you're also like listening to what the trees are telling you. And I feel like what the trees are saying is that this is a disturbed landscape. And what does that have to do with it now?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like what should I say the question is?
Attention to environmental artists with this infrastructure that has been very harmful and created, these toxic landscapes.
Well, the canal actually didn't create the toxic landscapes. That was the one that I mentioned was a dump site from the people of us transporting our trash to sort of non-urban space and just dumping it there. And so those are different problems. The industry along the canal, that dovetail along the industry along the railroads, like they're the ones who created the toxic spaces. The disruption of any landscape is going to create a new environment. And yeah, so I'm definitely seeing what I like particularly about the canal system is that it is a waterway. And so it is very much a natural system, and it's tethering into natural systems. It's done with gravity, and I would love it if there were more solar boats instead of diesel power boats on the canal. It's from a shipping standpoint the most eco-friendly way to ship stuff, and so I wish it was more used for shipping. But I am looking also at the landscapes, and I'm glad that the landscapes have now, I think, been identified as
as resources, as places to steward, as places to look at, as things that people want to visit. It's not just the infrastructure, they're also there for the trees. Like that's the reality. If it was just the canal, we wouldn't have, I don't think, the tourism. We would. They're there, people are there, I think, for the trees, which have been, at some point, you can tell when you go to every lock, there's somebody planted the trees. Not the cottonwoods, they were never planned, which is why I like them, because they're always kind of like sneaky. But they're always planned trees, and you can see which ones are still surviving. There's a really beautiful row of probably 60-year-old arborvitaes, which are now like some type of cedar at one of the locks of that yesterday. But yeah, because there wasn't a clear question, I can't give a clear answer, but yeah, I'm always thinking about it. And how can the landscape be given more priority around these places? Because a lot of them are not steward. A lot of them, like the stewardship stops at a very clear spot, and then the vines take over and the trees are being torn down. And so how can that continue to be a celebrated and incorporated part of the whole idea of the canal? Yeah. Yes.
Question we have on Zoom is, someone would like to take the Zoom class with you. You still offer those programs? So,
Oh, no. Yeah. So someone was asking about taking a Zoom class, which was probably connected to this embroidery project I did. No, don't. Yeah, that was really, we were doing Zoom lessons just for that one project. Yeah. And thankfully I don't have to teach online anymore either. I'm back to in person. So I really love being back in person, but Zoom has its great things.
another question we got is kind of the logistics of what you're doing with the current project. Did you send stamps?
Yes.
So they could get help out?
Yes, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I made sure that all of the return address, who throws away a stamp? No one's gonna throw away a good stamp. So my hope was that if every return address had envelope had a stamp in it, then people would use them. And so actually, that's a great segue into the fact that I have a stack here of unopened participant letters. And so I thought it would be fun to open a couple, like, and let's see if they're, maybe they're some of them won't be safe for work. Let's see. I was hoping that I actually wanted the language to be colorful, but I was told I should not encourage that. But I was hoping for like some salty language, because that would be great on in our. Okay, so this is great. We're very two participants from the Waterford shop, which is great. So I am a welder and rehab valves for the locks. For the locks, 4 valves per lock, and it keeps me busy as we do all the valves from Waterford to Fort Edward and the Erie Canal's Fonda and all the other sections out west. Cool, like that's like the coolest piece of text. And I also just love handwriting. And so this is a way of like me also just loving people's handwriting. And so each of the cards that I sent, I had embellished with gold or blue corners, so that when it came back to the museum, this could as itself as an object go on the wall. Like that's already the artwork. But then I can use the text in an artwork. And in theory, this text would then live on in an artwork. That artwork will then live in the Erie Canal corridor somewhere. And so people who work on the canal, if they want to, they'll be able to find their text out in the landscape somewhere and live on for a while. You run that. Oh, so the question on this one is, what is the task or process you don't think people outside of canals would understand? I'm a person outside of canals, so I'm hoping for answers that I don't understand. So that we run an old canal, gears, anchor rods, rehab a lock, which is called a flip out, take out valves, put in new ones, and put new wood on the gates that lets boats in and out of locks. A lot is involved. Yay, all right, let's do one more. I also love, yeah.
One more question.
One more question, okay.
It's about the name of your Instagram page.
Yes.
Why is it 524 miles?
That's a good,
362.
good question, because I asked several times, several authorities, how many miles of canal are in the active system? And if you include the lateral canals, yes, the answer is 524. And it does not include the historic canals, which are also fun to look at and I enjoy exploring as well. But 524 is
the number I was given, so that became the. All right, let's see here. That's two more, a blank one. Yeah, so this is another, what is the task you can understand? So keeping the gates free of ice so they are usable when we have to change them to keep water level of the river at the appropriate level. Yeah, I'm hoping a lot of them are going to be about ice and snow and the hardness of working in those places outdoors. Yeah, I mean, I've tried to visit some of them and I was freezing and I had my big jacket on and I can't imagine to be outside all day. So I imagine a lot of them would be about the relationship between weather and working outside. And I look forward to opening up more. Yeah. Oh, question.
Is there an association or organization that brings these workers together? And if not, are you gonna kind of build a sense of community amongst workers?
That's such a good question about building a sense of community around the work. And that's one of the most fun and the most rewarding parts about social practice is the residue is really the interactions that happen. They are spread out over 524 miles, but there are sections and the sections each have a section supervisor. So I get to coordinate with the supervisors and they help me reach the employees. So that's, and then maybe if there's if the artwork exists in calendar or book or exhibition form, if it moves throughout the system, then those will be moments in which people in those sections can go and enjoy the work that they being celebrated that they do. Yeah, and I wish it was even better. But you're also there's so much of the work is so removed from communities, like very isolating work. Some of it, it's almost like working at a lighthouse. And so the sense of developing that like community would be is even harder because of the geography of the locations just spread out.
This feels a lot like participatory research.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thinking about how they will shape you and
Yeah.
then also how you impact there.
Yeah, no, and I hope that there's some residue that is that. And also like when I read these, the idea was to do this during the research phase so that everything, I'm going to be learning so much from these texts. And so as I learn from them, I look at things differently. So I'll see bits and pieces and parts and the way things work and move. I'll learn and understand it better through these texts. Yeah, so they are definitely going to be teaching me a lot.
Question of my own.
Okay.
You've been mentioning, thinking about winter stuff.
Yeah.
I'm curious, are you sending out another round or anything to, I know Metropolitan has like seasonal summer toys, whatnot.
That is a good question. I haven't thought about it yet. Yeah. But I would love to have, I just did another rack, I learned of another batch of folks who didn't get it. I've done 2 rounds of mailing. One was 330 people and one was about 20. And so this new round of, maybe everyone will be so excited that they'll be asking to participate, and that would be great if I can get a new set of names to reach out. Awesome.
Well, it says Director Stratton is on the call. If anyone wants seasonal work, you're going to have the appropriation. Feel on.
Anything else? Anyone online? Any final calls or questions? So this would be a great time if you haven't chatted your location/memories. Maybe you can take a pause and just type that up. Doesn't have to be. We don't see what you're writing here. I can't see it, so we'll just save it and I'll get it at the end, so it won't be projected in the room. So it'll be. Don't worry about spelling things properly.
One question related to that, someone did share a message. They also said they have photos available if you're interested.
Okay. I kind of love seeing everything. How I would see them, if they're analog or digital? Yeah, so maybe they can include their email address in the chat and I can reach out if you're listening.
Follow-up email too, so you know.
Okay, yeah, they can email you access to those photographs. And also I'm not really much of a social media person until this year. And so creating the Instagram page just for this was kind of nice. I've met like people that are not here just who have found that throughout the corridor. They direct message me and I kind of encourage that. And so I'm hoping that more people will use that as a tool to like say, hey, go here, or hey, look at this. And so that's happened so far. I've got a few, go see this tree and that kind of thing. Yeah. But I'm only up to like 520 followers, so gotta get that up. See? Tell your friends. Right. Last minute. And I guess we're done. Thank you for coming online, and I'm really easy to find online. You can always reach out to Derek at the museum, and they can get to me, or you can just direct message me via Instagram and tell me what to do, or you can just find me online and email me directly. I'm very, very easy to find. Yeah. All right.